Welcome, kind listener, to this peaceful haven of history. This is a place where stories flow like a gentle river, carrying us far away from the rush of the present. Whether you are lying in bed, eyes growing heavy, or sitting quietly as the evening settles, know that you are among friends here. If you'd like, share in the comments where you are listening from. I treasure the chance to see how history brings together people from every corner of the world. And if these calm journeys speak to you, go ahead and subscribe so our paths may cross again in the chapters to come. But for now, let the noise of today drift away, and join me as we wander softly into the mists of the past. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back through the mists of time, to a world where the line between dream and reality was as thin as morning fog over the Aegean Sea. Tonight, we journey together into the frozen north, to a land of ice and fire, where the old gods walked among mortals and the very fabric of existence trembled with magic and destiny. This is the realm of Norse mythology, where warriors feasted in golden halls, where giants shaped the mountains with their hands, where the world itself was born from the body of a frost giant and would one day burn in the flames of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. In the beginning, before the sun warmed the earth, before the seas rolled with their eternal tides, before the first breath of wind stirred the leaves of the world tree, there was nothing. Picture, if you will, a vast emptiness stretching in all directions, not the darkness we know, but something older and stranger. The Norse called this primordial void Ginnungagap, the yawning abyss, a space pregnant with possibility yet empty of form. It was the silence before the first word, the stillness before the first movement, the cold before the first fire. To the north of this great emptiness lay Niflheim, the world of ice and mist. Imagine a realm of perpetual winter, where frost forms patterns like ancient runes on every surface, where the cold is so profound it seems to have a weight, a presence, a consciousness of its own. In the heart of Niflheim flowed Hvergelmir, the roaring cauldron, a spring from which 11 rivers poured forth, rivers with names like Svol and Gunthra, Fjorm and Fimbulthul, each one freezing as it flowed, creating vast glaciers that crept slowly toward the abyss of Ginnungagap. To the south lay Muspelheim, the realm of fire, a world of eternal flame and searing heat. Here the very air shimmered with waves of warmth, and rivers of molten rock flowed like water. The guardian of this realm was Surt, an ancient being of fire who predated even the gods themselves, waiting with his flaming sword for the day when he would set the world ablaze. The heat from Muspelheim poured endlessly toward the void, creating currents of warmth that drifted through the emptiness like breaths of some sleeping giant. And then, in the depths of time so distant that no memory could reach them, the impossible occurred. The frozen rivers from Niflheim met the warmth flowing from Muspelheim in the depths of Ginnungagap. Ice and fire, cold and heat, the two great opposites of existence found each other in that void between worlds. The ice began to melt, drop by precious drop, and from this mingling of opposing forces, from this marriage of ice and fire, the first life emerged. The ice giant Ymir was born from the melting frost, a being of such immense size that mountains would seem like pebbles in his hand. He was the first conscious thing in all of creation, the ancestor of all the giants who would come after him, and his very existence changed the fundamental nature of reality. As Ymir slept in the growing warmth, he began to sweat, and from the sweat under his left arm emerged a male and female giant, while his legs mated with each other and produced a six-headed son. Thus the race of frost giants, the Jotnar, came into being, children of ice and chaos, beings of immense power and ancient wisdom. But Ymir was not alone for long. As the ice continued to melt, it revealed another creation, Audhumla, the primordial cow, whose name means the nourisher. She was massive and beautiful, with udders that flowed with 4 rivers of milk that sustained Ymir and gave him strength. Audhumla herself fed by licking the salty ice blocks that surrounded her, and as she licked, something miraculous occurred. On the first day, hair emerged from the ice. On the second day, a head appeared. And on the third day, she had freed an entire being from his frozen prison, Buri, the first of the gods, beautiful and strong and filled with divine power. Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor married Bestla, who was herself the daughter of a giant. This marriage between the divine and the primordial, between order and chaos, between the new gods and the ancient giants, would set the pattern for much that was to come in Norse mythology. From this union came 3 sons, 3 brothers who would reshape all of creation: Odin, Vili, and Ve. These were the first of the Aesir, the gods who would rule over the heavens and the earth, and their coming would mark the end of the age of chaos and the beginning of the ordered cosmos. As the 3 brothers grew in power and wisdom, they looked upon Ymir and the ever-multiplying frost giants with concern. The giants were beings of pure chaos, wild and untamed, and the brothers understood that no ordered world could exist while Ymir lived. And so they made a decision that would echo through all the ages to come. They would slay the first being, the ancestor giant, and from his body create the world itself. The battle between the 3 gods and Ymir is not described in detail in the surviving texts, but we can imagine it as a conflict that shook the very foundations of existence. When at last Ymir fell, his blood, or perhaps we should say the waters of his body, poured forth in such quantities that it drowned nearly all the frost giants. A great flood swept through the realms, washing away the children of chaos, and only one giant named Bergelmir and his wife escaped by climbing into a hollowed tree trunk that served as a boat, floating upon the deluge until the waters receded. From this surviving pair, all the frost giants who came after would descend, and they would remember forever that the Aesir had murdered their ancestor and nearly destroyed their entire race. The 3 brothers dragged Ymir's enormous corpse to the center of Ginnungagap, and there they began the work of creation. With wisdom and skill, with divine power and careful craft, they shaped the primal matter of the giant's body into the world that would be called Midgard, the middle realm, the home of mortals. From Ymir's flesh, they formed the earth itself, rich and fertile, capable of sustaining life. From his blood and sweat, they made the seas and lakes, the rivers and streams that would water the land and provide pathways for travelers. From his bones, they raised up the mountains, those ancient peaks that scrape the sky and stand as eternal witnesses to the gods' great work. Ymir's teeth and fragments of broken bones became stones and boulders scattered across the land, while his hair was transformed into the trees and plants that would clothe the earth in green. The giant's skull became the dome of the sky itself, held aloft at its 4 corners by 4 dwarves, Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, whose names mean north, south, east, and west. These sturdy beings would forever hold up the heavens, ensuring that the sky did not fall and crush the world below. From Ymir's brains, the gods fashioned the clouds that drift across the heavens, carrying rain and snow, casting shadows on the earth below. But the brothers were not finished with their act of creation. They took sparks and embers from Muspelheim, those fragments of eternal fire, and set them in the sky to create the sun and moon and stars. The sun, radiant and warm, was placed in a chariot and given to a goddess named Sol to drive across the heavens each day. The moon, cool and mysterious, was entrusted to Sol's brother Mani, who would guide its path through the night sky. Both sun and moon were pursued eternally by wolves. Skol chased the sun, while Hati Hrodvitnesen pursued the moon, and it was said that one day, during Ragnarok, these wolves would finally catch and devour their prey, plunging the world into darkness. The 3 brothers walked along the seashore one day, surveying their newly created world, when they came upon 2 trees that had washed up on the beach. One was an ash tree, the other an elm, and the gods saw in these pieces of wood the potential for something greater. Odin gave them breath and life itself, the spark of consciousness that separates the living from the dead. Vili gave them the power of thought and movement, the ability to act upon the world and shape their own destinies. Ve gave them faces and the senses, sight to see the beauty of the world, hearing to catch the songs of birds and the whisper of wind, speech to communicate with one another and name the things around them. Thus were created Ask and Embla, the first man and the first woman, the ancestors of all humankind. The gods gave them Midgard as their home, that realm of earth and sea placed between the world of the gods above and the underworld below. To protect Midgard from the giants who still lurked in the outer regions, the gods built a great wall from Ymir's eyebrows, creating a barrier between the ordered world of men and the chaos of Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. But the world the gods had created was more complex than just earth and sky. Norse cosmology envisioned 9 worlds, 9 distinct realms of existence, all connected by and supported by Yggdrasil, the world tree, that mighty ash whose roots and branches held all of creation together. Imagine this tree as something beyond our normal understanding of size and scale. Its roots delve deeper than the deepest ocean, its trunk is wider than any mountain, its branches stretch farther than the eye can see, even the eye of a god. Yggdrasil is always green, always living, eternally renewing itself even as parts of it decay and die, a perfect symbol of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth that governs all existence. 3 great roots support Yggdrasil, each extending into a different realm. One root reaches into Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, where it is nourished by the Well of Ord, also called the Well of Fate. Here the 3 Norns dwell, Ord, Verdandi, and Skuld, whose names mean past, present, and future. These mysterious beings, who may be giantesses or something older and stranger still, weave the fates of all beings, gods and men and giants alike. Each day they draw water from the well and mix it with clay to seal the bark of the world tree, preventing it from rotting. They spin the threads of destiny on their great loom, and even the gods cannot fully predict or control what patterns they will weave. The second root of Yggdrasil extends into Jotunheim, the land of the giants, where it draws nourishment from the well of Mimir, the source of wisdom and knowledge. Mimir himself is a being of uncertain origin. Some say he was a god, others that he was something older, a primordial embodiment of memory and wisdom. The water of his well grants deep understanding to whoever drinks from it, but the price is always steep. Odin himself would one day sacrifice an eye to drink from Mimir's well, trading physical sight for the inner vision of true wisdom. The third root reaches down into Niflheim, the ancient realm of ice where creation began, and there it is gnawed upon by Nidhogg, a great dragon who dwells in the darkest depths. Nidhogg is both destroyer and renewer, for as he gnaws at the root of the world tree, he also feeds upon the corpses of oath-breakers and murderers who fall into his realm, serving as an agent of cosmic justice. A squirrel named Ratatosk runs up and down the trunk of Yggdrasil, carrying messages between Nidhogg in the depths and a great eagle that sits in the highest branches, stirring up conflict and discord with the words he bears back and forth. For stags bound through the branches of Yggdrasil, browsing on the tender shoots and leaves, Dane, Dvalin, Dunir, and Durathror. Their feeding helps to prune the tree, keeping it healthy even as it causes some destruction. Dew falls from the tree's branches to water the earth below, while from its trunk flows a honey-like substance that feeds the bees of the world. Everything is connected to Yggdrasil, everything depends upon it, and when the tree finally shudders and groans during Ragnarok, all the worlds will know that the end has come. The 9 worlds themselves are arranged in a pattern both vertical and horizontal, creating a cosmos of astonishing complexity. Highest and most glorious is Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, connected to Midgard by Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that shimmers with all the colors of creation. Asgard is a place of golden halls and eternal beauty, where the gods feast and hold council, where warriors train and poets sing of great deeds. Each of the major gods has their own hall in Asgard. Odin's hall Valskjaf with its throne Hlidskjaf from which he can see into all the worlds, Thor's hall Bilskirnir with its 540 rooms, Freya's hall Sesrumnir where she welcomes half of those who die in battle. Midgard, the Middle Earth, is the realm of humans, the world we have already described, with its oceans and mountains, forests and plains. It is a place of both beauty and danger, where mortals live brief lives but can achieve glory that echoes into eternity. The gods watch over Midgard with special interest, for humans are neither as powerful as gods nor as ancient as giants, but they possess something unique, the ability to create meaning through their choices, to write their own stories even within the limits set by fate. Jotunheim is the realm of the giants, that vast wilderness of stone and ice, of dark forests and raging rivers. It lies to the east of Midgard, separated by deep rivers and high mountains, a land where everything is larger and stranger than in the world of men. The giants are not simple monsters but beings of great wisdom and power, possessing ancient knowledge that even the gods must sometimes seek. They are the forces of chaos and nature, necessary to the functioning of the cosmos even as they threaten to overthrow the order the gods have established. Vanaheim is the home of the Vanir, that other tribe of gods who are associated with fertility, prosperity, and the natural world. They are older than the Aesir in some ways, more deeply connected to the earth and its cycles, and their magic is different, less concerned with battle and glory, more focused on growth and abundance. The Vanir and Aesir would fight a long and devastating war, the first war in all the worlds, but they would eventually make peace and exchange hostages, leading to a blending of their two kinds of divine power. Alfheim is the realm of the light elves, beings of beauty and magic who are associated with the sun and air, with light and life. They are ruled by Freyr, one of the Vanir gods who came to live in Asgard after the war, and their realm is described as bright and fair beyond mortal understanding. The light elves are skilled craftsmen and keepers of ancient lore, though they appear less frequently in the surviving myths than many other beings. Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, is the realm of the dwarves, those master craftsmen who dwell in caves and underground halls, mining precious metals and forging wonders that even the gods covet. The dwarves were born from the maggots that fed on Ymir's corpse, but the gods gave them humanoid form and consciousness, and they developed into beings of great skill and cunning. They would create many of the gods' most treasured possessions: Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, the golden hair of Sif, the ship Skidbladnir that could be folded up and put in a pocket, and countless other marvels. Niflheim remains the realm of ice and mist, the ancient place where creation began, now also the location of Hell, the realm of the dead. This is not a place of punishment in the Christian sense, but rather the destination of all those who die of old age or sickness rather than in battle. It is cold and dark, a place of shades and shadows, ruled over by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki, who presides over her realm with stern justice. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, remains in the south, eternally burning, with Surt still standing guard with his flaming sword, waiting for Ragnarok when he will march forth and set the world ablaze. And finally there is Helheim, sometimes counted as separate from Niflheim, sometimes as part of it, the specific region where the dead reside under Hel's rule. At the center of Asgard stands Odin's great hall, Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. Here is where half of those who die in battle are brought by the Valkyries, those warrior maidens who ride through the sky on supernatural horses, choosing which warriors will fall in each conflict and carrying the chosen dead to their eternal reward. Valhalla is described as having 540 doors, each wide enough for 800 warriors to march through side by side. Its rafters are made of spears, its roof is shingled with shields, and mail coats are scattered across the benches like cushions. Each morning, the Einherjar, the noble dead who dwell in Valhalla, arm themselves and go out into the fields to practice combat, fighting with all their skill and strength, falling and rising again, for they cannot truly die in this place. Each evening they return to the hall, their wounds healed, and feast on the meat of the boar Saehrimnir, who is slaughtered each day and comes back to life each night, ensuring an endless supply of food. They drink mead that flows from the udders of the goat Heidrun, who stands atop Valhalla and feeds on the leaves of Yggdrasil. This eternal cycle of combat and feasting prepares the Einherjar for their ultimate purpose, to fight alongside the gods when Ragnarok comes, when they will march out through those 540 doors to face the forces of chaos in the final battle. The gods themselves are complex beings, neither wholly good nor wholly evil, but rather embodiments of various forces and principles, capable of great wisdom and terrible mistakes, of noble sacrifice and petty cruelty. At their head stands Odin, the All-Father, a god of such complexity that he almost defies description. He is the god of war, but also of poetry and wisdom. He is the master of magic and the lord of the dead. He is the wanderer who roams the worlds in disguise, testing the hospitality of men and gathering knowledge wherever he can find it. Odin appears in the myths as a figure of contradictions. He is often described as an old man with a long gray beard, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a blue cloak, carrying a staff like a wanderer. He has only one eye, having sacrificed the other to Mimir's well in exchange for wisdom. 2 ravens sit on his shoulders. Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who fly forth each day to observe all that happens in the worlds and return each evening to whisper their findings in Odin's ears. At his feet sit 2 wolves, Jerry and Freki, who receive all the food from his plate, for Odin himself needs no sustenance except wine. Odin's pursuit of knowledge is relentless and often painful. In addition to sacrificing his eye for wisdom, he once hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, no food or water to sustain him, peering down into the darkness until the runes revealed themselves to him. The runes were not merely an alphabet but a magical system, each symbol containing deep meaning and power. By grasping the runes through his suffering, Odin gained access to magic and wisdom that elevated him above other beings. He traveled to Jotunheim to steal the mead of poetry from the giant Sudung, who kept it locked away in 3 great containers guarded by his daughter Gunnlod. Odin drilled through the mountain to reach the chamber where the mead was kept, seduced Gunnlod, and after spending 3 nights with her, was allowed to drink from each container. He drank all the mead in 3 great draughts, transformed into an eagle, and flew back to Asgard, pursued by Sudung in eagle form. Some of the mead spilled as he flew, and this became the portion available to mediocre poets, while the mead he safely brought to Asgard was reserved for those with true skill. Odin's relationship with mortals is complex. He grants victory in battle, but he is fickle, sometimes withdrawing his favor without warning. He loves brave warriors but sends them to their deaths when he needs them in Valhalla for Ragnarok. He appears to wanderers and travelers, testing their hospitality and wisdom, rewarding those who treat him well and punishing those who fail his tests, though he is disguised and they do not know they are dealing with a god. The All-Father has many names: Grimnir, Harbard, Gangleri, Balverk, and dozens more, each reflecting a different aspect of his nature or a different role he plays. He is called the Terrible One, the One-Eyed, the Raven God, the Gallows God, the Father of Magic. He seeks knowledge above all else, even knowing that his wisdom reveals a terrible truth, that Ragnarok is inevitable, that the gods will fall, that all his efforts to prevent or prepare for the end may ultimately prove futile. Yet he persists, gathering the Einherjar in Valhalla, making alliances, seeking ways to change or at least delay the fate that awaits them all. Odin's wife is Frigg, the queen of the gods, who is herself a powerful deity associated with marriage, motherhood, and prophecy. Frigg knows the fate of all beings, possessing the power of Cedar, the Norse form of magic particularly associated with knowing and shaping destiny. Yet she keeps her knowledge to herself, rarely sharing what she knows, even with her husband. She dwells in her own hall, Fensalar, and presides over her handmaidens, who are themselves goddesses of various aspects of domestic and emotional life. Frigg's love for her son Balder is absolute, and the story of her attempt to save him from his fated death is one of the most poignant in all Norse mythology. But that story belongs a bit later in our journey. For now, know simply that Frigg represents a kind of power different from Odin's, not the power of the warrior or the wandering seeker, but the power of the one who holds the home together, who sees and knows but chooses carefully when and how to act on that knowledge. Odin's sons are many, for he fathered children with various mothers across the realms. The mightiest of these is Thor, the thunder god, who stands as the champion of Asgard and the protector of Midgard. Where Odin is complex and often contradictory, Thor is straightforward and honest. Where Odin relies on cunning and magic, Thor trusts in his immense strength and his mighty hammer. Where Odin is feared and respected, Thor is loved and celebrated by common people who see in him a protector against the forces of chaos. Thor is a huge figure with flaming red hair and a great red beard, possessed of an enormous appetite and a quick temper, but also of great courage and loyalty. His most prized possession is Mjolnir, the hammer forged by the dwarven brothers Sindri and Brakr, a weapon that never misses its target and always returns to Thor's hand after being thrown. When Thor swings Mjolnir, lightning flashes across the sky. When he rides across the heavens in his chariot drawn by two goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, the wheels cause the thunder that mortals hear. Thor's primary role is to fight giants, those forces of chaos that constantly threaten the ordered world. He makes frequent journeys to Jotunheim, seeking out giants to battle, and the myths are full of his encounters with these beings. Sometimes he triumphs through strength, other times through cleverness, occasionally through the help of others. His hammer is deadly to the frost giants, and they fear him more than any other god. Yet Thor is not merely a warrior but also a god of agriculture and fertility, for his thunder brings the rains that make crops grow, and farmers invoked his name to bless their fields. Thor's wife is Sif, whose golden hair is one of her most notable features, hair that was once cut off by Loki in a malicious prank, causing Thor to threaten Loki's life until the trickster god commissioned the dwarves to forge new hair from actual gold that would grow like real hair. Some scholars suggest that Sif's golden hair represents the fields of grain, making her a goddess of the harvest, and her marriage to Thor a sacred union of thunder and earth, sky and field. Thor's home is Thrudheim, where stands his hall Bilskirnir, the largest building in all the worlds. Here he lives with his family, including his sons Magni and Modi, whose names mean strength and wrath, and his daughter Thrud, whose name means power. These children will survive Ragnarok when many others fall, suggesting that Thor's line and what he represents, honest strength, protection of home and community, straightforward dealing, will endure even when the gods themselves have fallen. Among the Aesir there is also Tyr, the god of war and justice, the sky god whose name is related to the word for deity itself in many Indo-European languages. Tyr is associated with oaths and lawful assembly, with the kind of courage that is not about winning glory but about doing what is right even at great personal cost. The defining story about Tyr tells how he alone was brave enough to place his hand in the mouth of Fenrir, the wolf son of Loki, as a pledge of good faith while the other gods bound the creature with a magical chain. When Fenrir realized he had been tricked and could not break free, he bit off Tyr's hand, leaving the god forever maimed but having saved the worlds from the wolf's depredations, at least for a time. Heimdall is the watchman of the gods, stationed at Bifrost where the Rainbow Bridge reaches Asgard. He is called the White God, and he requires less sleep than a bird, can see 100 leagues by day or night, and can hear the grass growing on the earth and the wool growing on sheep. He carries the horn Gjallarhorn, which he will blow when enemies approach Asgard, and its sound will be heard throughout all the worlds. Heimdall's origins are mysterious. He is said to be the son of 9 mothers, all sisters, all of whom gave birth to him at once, nourishing him with the strength of the earth, the moisture of the sea, and the heat of the sun. Bragi is the god of poetry and eloquence, husband of Idun who keeps the apples that preserve the god's youth. It is Bragi who welcomes the noble dead to Valhalla with poetic words, and Bragi who entertains the gods with songs of ancient deeds and heroes. Some scholars believe Bragi may have originally been a historical poet who was deified after death, though the myths treat him as one of the Aesir from the beginning. And then there is Loki, who is perhaps the most fascinating and troubling figure in all of Norse mythology. Loki is not properly one of the Aesir. He is the son of the giant Farbodi and the giantess Laufey, yet he became Odin's blood brother through a sacred oath, making him a member of the Aesir by adoption and choice rather than birth. Loki is the trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who breaks rules and crosses boundaries that others respect. He is handsome and eloquent, clever and creative, capable of solving problems that leave others baffled. But he is also malicious, destructive, willing to betray even those closest to him for the sake of a joke or out of spite. Loki's nature is fundamentally chaotic. He helps the gods as often as he harms them, giving them valuable gifts and then creating disasters they must overcome. He fathers monstrous children who will bring about Ragnarok, yet he also births Odin's eight-legged horse Sleipnir after transforming into a mare. He steals Idun's apples of youth and nearly causes the gods to age and die, but he also recovers them when the gods threaten him with death. He cuts off Sif's hair but then arranges for the dwarves to create wonders for the gods that become their most treasured possessions. He plots the death of Balder, the most beloved of all beings, an act so heinous that it finally turns even his defenders against him. Loki's relationship with the gods is strained and complex. They need him, for his cleverness gets them out of difficult situations, yet they distrust him, for he has betrayed them before and will again. He seems to resent his position, neither fully a god nor a giant, accepted by the Aesir but always on the margins, always a bit apart. As the myths progress and approach Ragnarok, Loki's actions become increasingly destructive, as if he has decided that if he cannot truly belong to the order the gods have created, he will help to tear it down. Loki's wife is Sigyn, who is loyal to him even when all others abandon him. His children by the giantess Angrboda are the most terrifying beings in the cosmos, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the world serpent, and Hel the goddess of the dead. When the gods learned of these children's existence and heard prophecies about the destruction they would bring, they took action. Hel was cast down into Niflheim, where she became ruler of the realm of the dead. Jormungandr was thrown into the ocean surrounding Midgard, where he grew so large that he encircles the entire world and bites his own tail. Fenrir they attempted to bind, and only Tyr's sacrifice made this possible, at least temporarily. The Vanir gods, who came to live in Asgard after the war between the two divine tribes, brought with them a different kind of power and wisdom. Njord is the god of the sea and seafaring, of wealth and prosperity that comes from trade and fishing. He dwells in Noten, his hall by the shore, and he has power over the winds and the calming of seas. The Vanir practice a form of magic called Seidr, which is associated with prophecy and manipulation of fate, with sexuality and boundary crossing, and which was considered somewhat shameful for men to practice, though Odin learned it regardless. Njord's son Freyr is one of the most beloved of all the gods, associated with prosperity, sunlight, and fair weather, with peace and pleasure and bountiful harvests. He is described as the most glorious of gods, and no one prays to him in vain. Freyr owns the ship Skidbladnir, which always has favorable wind and can be folded up to fit in a pocket, and a boar with golden bristles named Gullinbursti who can run through air and water faster than any horse and whose bristles shine so brightly they light up the darkest night. Freyr's story takes a tragic turn when he sits on Odin's throne Hlidskjalf, from which all the worlds can be seen. Looking out over Jotunheim, he sees a beautiful giantess named Gerd and falls instantly in love with her. His longing is so great that he wastes away, unable to eat or sleep, until his servant Skirnir offers to woo Gerd on his behalf. Freyr gives Skirnir his magical sword, the finest blade ever forged, which can fight by itself. Skirnir travels to Jotunheim and through a combination of gifts and threats eventually wins Gerd's agreement to marry Freyr. The two are wed and happy together, but Freyr's sacrifice of his sword will have terrible consequences during Ragnarok, when he faces the fire giant Surt without his greatest weapon. Freyr's sister is Freya, the goddess of love and beauty, of sex and desire, but also of war and death. She is the most beautiful of all goddesses, and she practices cedar magic, the art she taught to Odin. Freya rides in a chariot drawn by cats, and she owns a falcon feather cloak that allows the wearer to fly. Like Odin, she receives half of those who die in battle, taking them to her hall Sessrumnir in Folkvangr, the field of the folk. Freya weeps tears of red gold when her husband Odi goes on long journeys and cannot be found. The giants covet Freya's beauty, and several myths involve giants who demand her as payment for services or who try to kidnap her. The gods protect her fiercely, understanding that to give Freya to the giants would be to surrender something essential about their world, to allow chaos to claim victory over order in a fundamental way. Yet Freya herself is not weak or in need of protection. She is a warrior and a powerful magic user, capable of defending herself but also knowing when to let others fight on her behalf. The dwarves play a crucial role in Norse mythology, for they are the master craftsmen whose creations give the gods much of their power. The story of how the gods acquired their greatest treasures begins with one of Loki's malicious pranks. For no reason except his own twisted amusement, Loki cut off the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife, while she slept. When Thor discovered what had been done, he seized Loki and would have broken every bone in his body, but Loki swore to get the dwarves to forge new hair from real gold that would grow like natural hair. Loki traveled to Svartalfheim and sought out the sons of Ivaldi, master craftsmen among the dwarves. He commissioned them to make the golden hair, and while they were at it, they also created Skidbladnir, the magical ship for Freyr, and Gungnir, the spear for Odin that never misses its target. Pleased with these treasures, Loki decided to make a wager with another pair of dwarven brothers, Brakr and Sindri. He bet his own head that they could not create treasures as fine as those made by the sons of Ivaldi. Brakr and Sindri accepted the challenge and set to work in their forge. Sindri told his brother to work the bellows and not stop, no matter what happened, for the timing was critical to the magic they were weaving into their creations. Loki, desperate to win his wager, transformed himself into a fly and began to bite Brakr as he worked. The first item they created was Gullinbursti, the golden boar for Freyr, and though the fly bit Brakr's hand, he did not stop pumping the bellows. Next they made Draupnir, a golden arm ring for Odin that would drip 8 new rings of equal weight every 9th night, creating endless wealth. Again Loki bit Brakr, this time on the neck, but still the dwarf continued his work. For the third item, Sindri placed iron in the forge to create a hammer for Thor. This time Loki bit Brakr on the eyelid, and blood ran into his eye so that he could not see. For just a moment, the dwarf raised his hand to wipe away the blood, and the bellows stopped working. This tiny interruption affected the final product. When Mjolnir emerged from the forge, its handle was slightly shorter than Sindri had intended. Yet despite this minor flaw, the hammer was perfect in every other way, and when the gods were asked to judge which set of treasures was finest, they declared that Mjolnir was the greatest gift of all, for with it Thor could defend Asgard against the giants. Brakr had won the wager. Now Loki owed the dwarf his head, but when Brakr came to claim it, Loki argued that while Brakr could have his head, the wager had said nothing about his neck, and Brakr could not take the head without also taking part of the neck. The gods, though annoyed by Loki's trickery, acknowledged that he had found a loophole in the terms of the bet. So Brakr could not take Loki's head, but he did sew his lips shut with a leather thong, giving the worlds a brief period of peace from the trickster's lies and schemes. Of course, Loki eventually worked the thong free, but the humiliation was remembered. The gods' halls and their daily lives are described in the surviving texts with a mixture of grandeur and familiarity. Each day they ride across Bifrost to the Well of Ord, where they hold council and settle disputes. The rainbow bridge trembles beneath their horses' hooves, and it is said that it glows red at one edge because the giants would climb it to invade Asgard if not for the heat that wards them away. Heimdall keeps constant watch, and nothing escapes his notice, neither the stealthy approach of enemies nor the secret meetings of gods who plot and plan. The gods feast often in their halls, drinking mead and ale, eating and making merry, listening to the songs that Bragi creates and telling stories of their own adventures and the deeds of ancient times. Yet there is always an undercurrent of tension, for they know, especially Odin knows, that their time is limited, that Ragnarok approaches, that the great wolf will break his chains and the world serpent will rise from the sea and the dead will sail from Niflheim in a ship made from the fingernails of corpses. The gods live in the shadow of their own ending, and this knowledge colors everything they do. The relationship between gods and giants is complex and multifaceted, not simply a matter of good versus evil but something stranger and more nuanced. The giants possess wisdom that the gods need. Odin learned runes from a giant, learned the secrets of cedar magic from giantesses, drank from Mimir's well, which is in giant territory. The gods sometimes marry giants or take them as lovers. Njord was married to Skadi, a giantess who came to Asgard seeking compensation for her father's death at the hands of the gods. Odin himself fathered children with giantesses, including Thor, whose mother was Jord, the personification of the earth itself. Yet despite these connections, despite the intermingling of divine and giant blood, the two groups remain fundamentally opposed. The giants represent chaos, the wild forces of nature that care nothing for human concerns or the ordered world the gods have created. They are winter and storm, avalanche and earthquake, the grinding of glaciers and the eruption of volcanoes. The gods must constantly defend their creation against the giants' encroachments, and many of the myths involve giants attempting to infiltrate Asgard or steal precious things like Freya or the apples of youth. One such story tells how a giant, disguised as a master mason, came to Asgard and offered to build an impregnable wall around the realm of the gods. He claimed he could complete the work in 3 seasons, but his price was high. He wanted the sun, the moon, and Freya as his wife. The gods, urged on by Loki, agreed to the bargain, certain that the work could not be completed in time. But they added a condition: if the wall was not completely finished by the first day of summer, the giant would receive no payment at all. The giant agreed, asking only that he be allowed to use his horse, Svadilfari, to help with the work. This seemed a reasonable request, so the gods consented. But Svadilfari was no ordinary horse. He was enormously strong and could haul massive stones that would have taken dozens of men to move. With his horse's help, the giant made astonishing progress, and as winter wore on and spring approached, the gods began to realize with growing alarm that the wall might actually be completed in time. 3 days before summer, with only the gate left to build, the gods gathered in council and demanded to know whose idea it had been to agree to this bargain. Of course, it had been Loki's suggestion, and now the other gods turned on him with threats of death and torture if he did not find a way to prevent the giant from completing his work and claiming his terrible payment. Loki, frightened for his life, promised to solve the problem. That night, as the giant led Svadilfari out to fetch more stone, a beautiful mare appeared at the edge of the forest, neighing enticingly. Svadilfari, driven by instinct, broke away from his master and chased after the mare, who led him on a wild pursuit through the forest that lasted all night. The giant, deprived of his horse's help, could not finish the gate in time. Furious at being cheated, he revealed his true nature, his giant form swelling with rage. Now that they knew he was a giant and not a skilled craftsman from among mortal men, the gods had no qualms about dealing with him. They called for Thor, who came swiftly from the east and brought Mjolnir down on the giant's skull, shattering it and sending him to Niflheim. As for the mare that had distracted Svadilfari, that was Loki in female form, and some months later, Loki gave birth to an 8-legged foal, gray as clouds, the fastest horse in all the worlds. This was Sleipnir, who became Odin's mount, able to carry the Allfather through the sky and even down into the realm of the dead. This story, like many in Norse mythology, shows the moral ambiguity that permeates these tales. The gods are willing to lie and cheat, to make promises they plan to break, yet they are outraged when they risk having to keep their word. Loki is both the source of the problem and the solution, both villain and hero, and his gender-crossing shape-shifting is accepted without comment as simply another aspect of his boundary-breaking nature. The gods defend their world and their treasures, but their methods are not always honorable, and they recognize no rules that bind them when their interests are at stake. The most beloved of all the gods was Balder, son of Odin and Frigg, who is described as the most beautiful and gracious of all beings. He is wise and eloquent, merciful and kind, and he shines with an inner light that makes all who see him love him. Balder is married to Nanna, and they have a son named Forseti, who is the god of justice and reconciliation. Everything about Balder seems perfect, blessed, destined for greatness and long life. But in the Norse cosmos, perfection itself is fragile, and even the brightest light must eventually be extinguished. Balder began to be troubled by dark dreams, visions of his own death that came to him night after night. These dreams disturbed not only Balder but all the gods, for the idea that Balder, perfect, innocent Balder, might die was unthinkable. His mother Frigg decided to protect her son by any means necessary. She traveled through all the worlds, extracting oaths from everything, from fire and water, iron and all metals, stones and earth, trees and plants, diseases and poisons, beasts and birds and creeping things, that they would not harm Balder. When she had gathered these oaths, it seemed that Balder was invulnerable, and the gods, in the way that gods will do, made a game of it. They would stand Balder in the middle of the gathering and throw things at him, stones, spears, axes, and everything would veer away or bounce off harmlessly. Balder stood smiling while his companions celebrated his invincibility, and everyone was happy. Everyone, that is, except Loki. The trickster god, growing resentful of Balder's perfection and the love everyone bore him, disguised himself as an old woman and went to Frigg. In casual conversation, he asked if it was really true that all things had sworn not to harm Balder. Frigg, proud of her accomplishment, confirmed that it was so, but then she added one small detail. There was one thing, a small plant called mistletoe that grew west of Valhalla, which had seemed too young and insignificant to bother asking for an oath. Armed with this knowledge, Loki found the mistletoe and fashioned it into a dart. He returned to where the gods were gathered, amusing themselves by throwing things at Balder. Loki noticed that Balder's blind brother Hod stood to one side, unable to participate in the celebration. Loki approached him and offered to help him join in the fun, guiding his hand so that he too could honor Balder by throwing something at him. Hod, grateful for the assistance, allowed Loki to place the mistletoe dart in his hand and direct his aim. The dart flew true, pierced Balder's heart, and the most beloved of gods fell dead. The silence that followed was absolute, the shock too great for words. The gods stood frozen, unable to believe what they had seen. Then grief exploded among them, grief so profound that none could speak, for words were inadequate to the loss they felt. Balder was dead, and with his death, something bright and pure had gone out of the world, never to return. Frigg asked if anyone would volunteer to ride to Hel and offer a ransom for Balder's return. Hermod, another of Odin's sons, agreed to make the journey. He mounted Sleipnir, that 8-legged horse who alone could traverse the path to Niflheim, and rode for 9 days and nights through valleys so dark and deep that he could see nothing. At last he came to the river Joel, which forms the boundary of Hel's realm, and crossed the golden bridge that spans it, the bridge that echoes with the footsteps of the dead but rang loud beneath Sleipnir's hoofs. The guardian of the bridge told Hermod that Balder had already crossed, heading toward Hel's hall. Hermod rode on until he came to the gate of Hel, and there Sleipnir proved his worth, leaping over the gate in a single bound. In Hel's hall, Hermod found Balder sitting in the seat of honor, and the two brothers spent the night in sad reunion. In the morning, Hermod pleaded with Hel to release Balder, describing the grief that filled all the worlds at his loss. Hel listened without expression, her face half living and half corpse, and finally she said she would test whether Balder was as universally loved as Hermod claimed. If everything in all the worlds would weep for Balder, she would release him. But if even one thing refused to shed tears, then Balder must remain in her realm. Hermod agreed and rode back to Asgard with this news. The gods sent messengers throughout all the worlds, begging everything to weep for Balder. And everything did weep, people and animals, the earth and stones, trees and metals, just as they still weep in the form of dew when brought from cold into warmth. But the messengers encountered one giantess, Thok, sitting in a cave. When they asked her to weep for Balder, she refused, saying in cold words that Balder had never brought her any benefit in life, and hell could keep what she held. The messengers returned with heavy hearts, and Balder remained among the dead. Most versions of the myth suggest, though they do not state it directly, that Thor was actually Loki in disguise, ensuring that his mischief would be complete and irreversible. After Balder's death, Loki fled from Asgard, knowing that his role in the tragedy would soon be discovered and that the gods' patience with him had finally run out. For a time he hid in the mountains, building a house with doors facing all directions so he could see anyone approaching. During the day he transformed himself into a salmon and hid in a waterfall, but at night he would sit by his fire and wonder if the gods had any way to catch him in fish form. To pass the time, he began taking linen and twisting it into a net, the first fishing net ever created. But one day he looked up and saw through his open door that the gods were approaching, led by Odin who had spotted him from Yggdrasil. Quickly Loki threw the net into the fire and jumped into the waterfall in his salmon form. But when the gods entered his house, Kvasir, the wisest of beings, whose story we will come to shortly, examined the ashes in the fireplace and recognized the pattern of a net. He explained to the other gods what Loki had invented and how it could be used to catch fish. The gods fashioned a net and dragged it through the waterfall, but Loki jumped over it. They weighted the net with stones and dragged again, and this time Loki swam out to the sea, but Thor was waiting there and caught the salmon in his hands. Loki tried to slip free, but Thor held him firmly, squeezing so hard that the salmon's back became narrow, which is why all salmon have narrow backs to this day. Now the gods had Loki in their power, and their mercy was exhausted. They dragged him to a cave deep underground. They took 3 flat stones and stood them on end, boring holes through each. They found Loki's sons, Vali and Narfi, not to be confused with other gods of the same names. They transformed Vali into a wolf, who in his animal frenzy attacked and killed his brother Narfi. The gods took Narfi's entrails, which became as strong as iron, and used them to bind Loki across the 3 stones, tying him at the shoulders, hips, and knees. Skadi, the giantess who had married Njord and who had always hated Loki, took a venomous serpent and fastened it above Loki's face so that poison dripped onto him. There Loki was condemned to lie until Ragnarok, suffering in agony as the venom burned him. But Sigyn, his faithful wife, remained with him, holding a bowl to catch the drops of poison. When the bowl fills and she must turn away to empty it, the venom falls on Loki's face, and he writhes in such pain that the earth shakes, and mortals call these tremors earthquakes. Loki's binding marks a turning point in the cosmic order. The trickster who had been both helper and hindrance to the gods is now removed from their society, but his removal does not bring peace. Instead, it is the beginning of the end, for Loki's bonds will not hold forever, and when he breaks free during Ragnarok, his rage and desire for vengeance will be absolute. Before we continue toward that final doom, let us turn our attention to the mortals who lived in Midgard, for the gods took great interest in human affairs, and many of the most famous myths involve the interactions between divine beings and mortal heroes. The Norse people told stories of legendary kings and warriors, of cunning merchants and wise women, of heroes who achieved glorious deeds and whose names would be remembered in song. The greatest mortal heroes were often the children of gods, inheriting supernatural abilities from their divine parents while remaining fundamentally human in their mortality. These heroes founded dynasties, killed monsters, sought treasure and glory, won beautiful brides, and died deaths both glorious and tragic. Their stories were told in the great halls during the long winter nights, reminding listeners that though life was short and often brutal, fame and reputation could outlast death itself. One such hero was Sigurd, greatest of all the Volsungs, whose story touches upon themes of gold and curses, dragons and betrayal, love and revenge. His tale begins generations before his birth, with the god Odin's interference in mortal affairs. Odin had taken an interest in a mortal man named Volsung, granting him blessings and ensuring that his line would produce mighty warriors. In Volsung's hall stood a great tree, and into this tree Odin himself, disguised as an old man with a wide-brimmed hat, thrust a sword so deeply that none could pull it free. He declared that whoever could draw forth the sword would possess it, and it would bring them victory in every battle. Many warriors tried and failed to draw the sword, but finally Volsung's son Sigmund succeeded, pulling the blade free as easily as if it had never been stuck at all. This was Gram, a magical sword that could cut through iron and stone, and with it Sigmund became a great hero, performing mighty deeds and winning fame throughout the north. He married twice, and his second wife was Hjordis, who was pregnant with his child when Sigmund fell in battle against overwhelming odds. As he lay dying, he told Hjordis to preserve the fragments of Gram, for their son would reforge the sword and become an even greater hero than his father. That son was Sigurd, who grew up in the court of his stepfather, fostered and trained in all the arts of war and peace. When he reached manhood, he sought out the dwarf Regan, who was a master smith, and asked him to forge a sword. Regan made 2 swords, but each shattered when Sigurd tested it against an anvil. Finally, Hjordis brought forth the fragments of Gram, and from these pieces Regan forged a new blade so sharp and strong that it could cut through an anvil and could slice a tuft of wool floating on water. Armed with this magnificent weapon, Sigurd was ready for his great adventure. Regan told Sigurd about his brother Fafnir, who had transformed himself into a dragon to guard a cursed treasure. This treasure had originally belonged to the dwarf Andvari, who had hidden it in a waterfall and placed a curse upon it, declaring that it would bring death to everyone who possessed it. Through a series of murders and betrayals, the treasure came to Regan and Fafnir's father, and when the father died, Fafnir killed his brother Ar and claimed all the gold for himself. His greed transformed him into a great serpent dragon, and he lay coiled upon the treasure, allowing no one to approach. Regan urged Sigurd to kill Fafnir and claim the treasure, though he said nothing about the curse that lay upon the gold. Sigurd agreed and set off to find the dragon's lair. He dug a pit in the path Fafnir used when crawling to the river to drink, and when the great dragon passed over, Sigurd thrust his sword upward into the creature's heart. As Fafnir lay dying, he warned Sigurd about the curse, but the young hero paid no heed, for he was fearless and proud. Regan appeared and asked Sigurd to cut out the dragon's heart and roast it for him. While cooking the heart, Sigurd burned his thumb and put it in his mouth to ease the pain. The moment the dragon's blood touched his tongue, he gained the ability to understand the speech of birds. He heard the birds in the trees above discussing how Regan planned to kill him and take all the treasure for himself. Acting quickly, Sigurd struck off Regan's head with Gram, claimed the treasure for himself, and rode away on his magnificent horse Grani, loaded with gold. Sigurd's adventures continued as he climbed a mountain where flames surrounded a castle. Within the flames lay a woman in armor, asleep under a spell. This was Brynhild, one of Odin's Valkyries, who had been punished by the Allfather for disobeying him and granting victory to the wrong warrior in battle. Odin had pricked her with a sleep thorn and decreed that she would sleep until awakened by a man brave enough to ride through the flames. Sigurd had no fear of fire, and he woke Brynhild with a kiss. The two fell in love immediately, pledging their devotion to each other and exchanging rings as tokens of their betrothal. But fate and the curse of the treasure had other plans. Sigurd came to the court of King Juki, where he was welcomed warmly and made much of for his heroic deeds. The queen, Grimhild, was skilled in magic, and she decided that Sigurd would be an excellent husband for her daughter Gudrun. She gave Sigurd a potion that made him forget Brynhild entirely, and in his enchanted state, he married Gudrun and swore brotherhood with her brothers Gunnar and Hogni. Gunnar desired to marry Brynhild, who still waited in her flame-encircled castle for Sigurd to return. But Gunnar's horse would not pass through the flames, and even when he borrowed Grani, the horse refused to carry him. Finally, through magic, Gunnar and Sigurd exchanged appearances, and Sigurd in Gunnar's form rode through the flames and won Brynhild's hand. They spent 3 nights together, but Sigurd placed his sword between them in the bed, honoring his brotherhood oath to Gunnar. Then he returned to his true form, and Brynhild, believing she had been won by Gunnar, agreed to marry him. But the truth could not remain hidden forever. One day, Brynhild and Gudrun quarreled about whose husband was greater, and in her anger, Gudrun revealed that it was Sigurd, not Gunnar, who had ridden through the flames. She even produced the ring that Brynhild had given to Sigurd, the ring he had given to Gudrun as a wedding gift. Brynhild was devastated, humiliated, and enraged. She had been twice betrayed, first by Sigurd's forgetting her, then by his deception in winning her for another man. Brynhild's grief turned to a desire for vengeance. She manipulated Gunnar and his brothers, claiming that Sigurd had broken faith with them and violated her honor. Though Gunnar was bound by oaths of brotherhood that prevented him from harming Sigurd, his younger brother Guttorm had sworn no such oaths. They urged him to kill Sigurd, and one morning he crept into Sigurd's chamber and thrust a sword through him as he lay in bed with Gudrun. Sigurd seized Gram and threw it after his murderer, cutting Guttorm in half, but the hero's strength was fading. He died in Gudrun's arms, and with his death, the curse claimed another victim. Brynhild laughed when she heard of Sigurd's death, but her triumph was hollow. She knew that life without Sigurd was unbearable, that she had destroyed the only men she could ever love. She ordered a great funeral pyre to be built, and when Sigurd's body was laid upon it, she dressed in her finest armor, took up a sword, and stabbed herself. She asked to be burned beside Sigurd, and her final wish was granted. The flames consumed them both, their ashes mingling in death as they had been unable to remain together in life. The curse of the treasure continued to work its evil. Gudrun's brothers took possession of Sigurd's gold, and this led to further betrayals and murders. Gudrun married again, to a king named Atli who coveted the treasure. He invited her brothers to his hall and then killed them, trying to force them to reveal where they had hidden the gold. But they died without speaking, and the treasure was lost. Gudrun avenged her brothers by killing her own sons and serving their flesh to Atli at a feast, then burning down his hall with him inside. So the curse worked its way through generations, bringing death and sorrow to all who touched the accursed gold. The story of Sigurd and the Volsungs is one of the most famous in Norse legend, combining elements of tragedy and heroism, love and betrayal, magic and mortality. It shows the Norse understanding that even the greatest heroes are subject to fate, that curses have power, that the choices we make ripple outward to affect countless others, and that glory and doom are often two sides of the same coin. Another realm of Norse mythology that deserves our attention is the rich tradition of beliefs about death and the afterlife. The Norse had a complex understanding of what happened to people after they died, with different destinations based on how one died and what kind of life one had led. As we have already discussed, warriors who died bravely in battle might be chosen by the Valkyries to go to either Valhalla or to Freya's Hall Folkvanger. There they would spend their afterlife in feasting and fighting, preparing for Ragnarok. But what of those who died peacefully in their beds, of old age or sickness? These went to Hel's realm in Niflheim, which was not necessarily a place of punishment but simply the destination of ordinary dead. Hel's hall was called Eljudnir, and her table was called Hunger, her knife Famine, her bed Sickbed. The realm was dark and cold, and its inhabitants were pale shadows of their former selves, but they were not tortured or tormented unless they had committed terrible crimes in life. Those who broke oaths or committed murder might end up in Nastrand, the shore of corpses, where Nidhogg the dragon gnawed on their bodies for eternity. Drowning at sea was considered a somewhat better fate than dying of sickness, for those who drowned might go to the halls of Ran, goddess of the sea, who caught drowning sailors in her net and entertained them beneath the waves. Sailors therefore carried gold with them when they traveled, as an offering to Ran should they drown. The Norse also believed that something of the person might remain with the body after death, which is why proper burial or cremation was so important. A restless corpse might rise as a draugr, an undead creature that haunted its burial mound and attacked the living. These beings retained some of their living personality but were also consumed by greed and malice, defending their buried treasure and seeking to harm their former friends and family. Only a hero could defeat a draugr, usually by fighting it in single combat, cutting off its head, and burning the body to ensure it could not rise again. The funeral customs varied depending on the deceased's status and the family's wealth. Important people might be buried in ships, either actual vessels or ship-shaped arrangements of stones, with grave goods to sustain them in the afterlife, weapons and tools for men, jewelry, and domestic items for women. The ship symbolized the journey the dead person was undertaking, sailing from the shores of life to whatever realm awaited them. Sometimes slaves would be sacrificed to accompany their master or mistress, ensuring they would have servants in the afterlife, though this practice was controversial even among the Norse themselves. Cremation was also common, with the deceased placed on a funeral pyre along with their possessions and sometimes their horse or other animals. The smoke rising from the pyre was thought to carry the soul upward to the heavens. Great heroes and kings might have massive mounds raised over their graves, creating landmarks that would preserve their memory for generations. These burial mounds dotted the landscape of Scandinavia, silent reminders of the ancient dead and the glory they had achieved in life. The Norse also recognized the existence of various supernatural beings beyond the gods and giants. The elves, as we have mentioned, lived in Alfheim, but they also appeared throughout the mortal world. The light elves were beautiful and benevolent, associated with fertility and abundance. The dark elves, who some sources conflate with the dwarves, lived underground and were skilled in crafts but could be dangerous to mortals who offended them. Farmers would leave offerings for the elves to ensure good harvests and healthy livestock. The dwarves, though we have spoken of them as craftsmen, were also associated with wisdom and magic, with ancient lore and secret knowledge. They turned to stone if caught in sunlight, which is why they lived in caves and underground halls, emerging only at night. Many geographic features, unusual rock formations, caves, and crevices, were said to be dwarves who had been caught by the dawn and petrified where they stood. There were also the Norns, those beings who wove fate for every individual. The three great Norns at the Well of Ord determined the destinies of gods and men, but there were also lesser Norns who attended the birth of each child and set the course of that life. Some Norns were benevolent, granting long life and good fortune, while others were cruel, decreeing suffering and early death. The Norse believed that fate was fixed, that what the Norns had woven could not be unraveled, yet they also believed that one could face one's fate with courage or cowardice, acceptance or resistance, and that this choice mattered even when the outcome was predetermined. The Landvetter, or land spirits, inhabited every feature of the landscape, rocks and trees, hills and streams. These beings could bring prosperity or misfortune depending on how they were treated. When ships approached land, they were supposed to remove the dragon head prows so as not to frighten the land spirits. When settling new territory, care had to be taken to honor the spirits who already dwelt there. Building a house on the wrong spot or cutting down a sacred tree could bring terrible luck. Trolls were larger, more dangerous beings, often dwelling in the mountains or forests, sometimes described as a type of giant, other times as a separate category of monster. They were generally hostile to humans, stupid but strong, and they too turned to stone in sunlight. Many folk tales tell of clever heroes who tricked trolls into staying out until dawn, ensuring their destruction. The Dazur were female spirits associated with particular families or places, serving as protective guardians but also as figures connected to fate and death. Sacrifices were made to the Dazur to ensure their favor and protection. Some scholars believe the Valkyries may have originally been a type of Dis, specialized spirits who chose the slain and carried them to the halls of the gods. The complexity of Norse cosmology and the richness of its mythology reflect a people who saw the world as filled with spiritual power, where everything from the mightiest god to the smallest stream had consciousness and agency, where the visible and invisible worlds interpenetrated each other, and where humans lived in constant negotiation with supernatural forces. The seasonal cycle was deeply significant to the Norse people, who lived in a harsh climate where surviving winter required careful preparation and where the return of spring was a matter of life and death. Midwinter, the darkest time of year, was marked by great feasts and celebrations, sacrifices to the gods to ensure that the sun would return and the world would not sink forever into ice and darkness. This celebration, called Yule, involved feasting and drinking, the lighting of fires to symbolically encourage the sun's return, and religious rituals to honor the gods and the spirits. Summer was equally important, a time of plenty when the long days allowed for farming, fishing, trading, and raiding. The Norse held assemblies called things during the summer months, where freemen would gather to settle disputes, make laws, and conduct the political business of their communities. These assemblies were sacred events, held under the protection of the gods, and violence during a thing was strictly forbidden. The Norse calendar was based on lunar months, with the year divided into winter and summer rather than 4 seasons. Time itself was understood differently than in our modern world. Rather than seeing time as an abstract progression of identical units, the Norse understood time as qualitative, with each moment having its own character and significance determined by what happened in it. An event was dated by reference to other events, the summer when Harold went west over sea, or the winter after the great battle, rather than by numbers in a sequence. This understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear is fundamental to Norse mythology. The gods know that Ragnarok is coming, that their world will end in fire and flood, yet life continues, the cycle of seasons persists, and the appropriate response is not despair but determination to live well and die bravely when the time comes. There is a fatalism in Norse thought, a recognition that striving against fate is ultimately futile, yet this fatalism does not lead to passivity but rather to a fierce insistence on facing whatever comes with courage and dignity. The role of women in Norse society and mythology deserves particular attention, for it was more complex than in many other ancient cultures. Women could not normally bear weapons or fight in battles, yet they held significant power in other spheres. A woman managed the household, controlled the keys to the storerooms, and in her husband's absence, she had full authority over the farm and its workers. Women could own property, could divorce their husbands if they were mistreated, and could speak at the thing to present legal cases, though they needed a male representative to argue on their behalf. In the mythological realm, goddesses like Freya, Frigg, and Skadi wielded immense power. The Valkyries were female warriors who served Odin and made life and death decisions about who would fall in battle. The Volvas, or seeresses, were women who practiced cedar magic and could see into the future, speaking prophecies that even the gods heeded. Skilled women in magic were both respected and feared, for their power to curse or bless, to see hidden things and to shape fate itself. The sagas tell of women who were strong and independent, who counseled their husbands in matters of strategy and honor, who sometimes urged vengeance and other times counseled peace. They tell also of women who took revenge for murdered kinsmen, who managed complex diplomatic arrangements through marriages, and who preserved the memory of their families through the stories they told their children. The Norse ideal of femininity was not passive or submissive but rather strong, capable, and wise, though always within the bounds of what was considered appropriate for women. The practice of cedar magic, which we have mentioned several times, was particularly associated with women, though Odin himself learned it and practiced it despite the shame attached to men who did so. Cedar involved going into trance states, communicating with spirits, seeing distant events or future possibilities, and manipulating the threads of fate. A Volva practicing cedar would sit on a high platform, surrounded by a circle of women who sang the songs that helped her enter the trance state. In this altered consciousness, she could see things hidden from ordinary sight and speak prophecies about what was to come. One of the most important prophetic texts in Norse mythology is the Voluspa, the prophecy of the seeress, in which a Volva summoned by Odin recounts the history of the cosmos from creation to destruction and beyond. Let us turn our attention now to that final chapter of Norse mythology, the prophecy of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the world will end in fire and flood and the great cycle will begin anew. The signs of Ragnarok's approach are many and terrible. First will come the Fimbulwinter, 3 winters following one after another with no summer between them. Snow will drive from all directions, frost will be severe beyond measure, and winds will be bitter. The sun will provide no warmth, and darkness will grow ever longer. In this desperate time, morality itself will collapse, brothers will fight brothers, fathers will kill sons, sisters' sons will commit incest. The bonds of kinship that hold society together will dissolve, and people will become no better than beasts, caring only for their own survival. The golden rooster Gullinkambi will crow to wake the Einherjar in Valhalla, preparing them for the final battle. In the underworld, a rust-red rooster will crow to wake the dead. The hound Garm, who guards Hell's gates, will break free and howl with a voice that echoes through all the worlds. The earth itself will begin to shake as Loki breaks free from his bonds, his fury at his long imprisonment making him terrible beyond imagination. In the east, in Ironwood, the giantess who breeds wolves will have produced countless offspring, and among them are Skoll and Hati, who have chased the sun and moon since the beginning of time. Now, at last, these wolves will catch their prey. Skoll will swallow the sun, and Hati will devour the moon, plunging the world into darkness. The stars will vanish from the sky, falling like burning rain. Blood will rain from the heavens, and the very air will be poisoned. Yggdrasil, the world tree that has supported all of creation, will tremble and groan. The mountains will collapse, and every chain and bond will break. Fenrir, the wolf who has been bound since the gods tricked him in his youth, will finally break free. His jaws will gape so wide that his upper jaw touches the sky and his lower jaw scrapes the earth. Fire will blaze from his eyes and nostrils. He will advance, devouring everything in his path, and the gods will know that their doom has come. Jormungandr, the world serpent who has encircled Midgard since the beginning, will thrash in the ocean, causing tidal waves that will sweep over the land. He will rear up out of the sea, his vast coils churning the waters, and the poison from his breath will fill the air and the sea, killing fish and birds and any living thing that breathes it. The serpent will make his way toward the battlefield where the final confrontation will take place. In Niflheim, the ship Naglfar will break free from its mooring. This vessel is constructed from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, which is why the Norse were careful to trim the nails of corpses before burial, for every untrimmed nail contributed to the completion of this dreadful ship. Naglfar is enormous enough to carry all the dead from Hell's realm, and the giant Hrym will steer it northward toward the battlefield. The ship will sail on the flood waters that cover the earth, and its crew of the dead will hunger for the destruction of the living. From the south will come Surt and the sons of Muspel, the fire giants who have waited since the beginning of time for this moment. Surt's sword blazes brighter than the sun itself, and as he and his followers advance, they will set the world aflame. The Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, which has connected Asgard to Midgard since the gods built it, will finally collapse under the weight of the fire giants crossing it, unable to withstand their heat and the destructive power they carry. Loki, free at last, will take command of the forces of chaos. Some versions say he will steer Naglfar, bringing the legions of the dead to fight against the gods he once called his companions. His children, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel, will all play their part in the destruction. Loki's betrayal will be complete, his long-simmering resentment finally given full expression, and he will seek to destroy everything the gods have built. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, will see the enemies approaching from his post at the remains of Bifrost. He will raise the horn to his lips and blow with all his divine strength, and the sound will be heard throughout all the 9 worlds. This is the call to arms, the summons to the final battle, and all who hear it will know that the end has come. The gods will rise from their halls, the Einherjar will pour forth from Valhalla's many doors, and they will march to Vigrid, the plain where the final battle will take place. Odin will ride at the head of the gods, wearing his golden helmet, his spear Gungnir in his hand, his ravens flying above him. He will seek out Fenrir, the wolf who has been prophesied to be his doom. Thor will stand beside his father, eager to face Jormungandr, the ancient enemy he has encountered several times before. Freyr will ride forth, but he will face Surt without his magical sword, the weapon he gave away to Wingerd's hand, and this will prove fatal. Tyr will battle Garm, the Hound of Hell. Heimdall will face Loki, the two ancient enemies meeting at last in final combat. The Battle of Ragnarok will be like nothing ever seen before, a conflict that will shake the foundations of reality itself. The armies will clash on the plain of Vigrid, which is described as being 100 leagues in every direction, and even this vast space will barely contain the combatants. The sky will split apart, the earth will burn, and the very elements will war against each other. Odin will advance toward Fenrir, the great wolf who has grown so large that his shadow covers mountains. The All-Father, who has sacrificed so much for wisdom, who has prepared for this moment throughout his long existence, will fight with all his divine power and skill. But the Norns have woven this fate, and it cannot be changed. Fenrir will open his terrible jaws and swallow Odin whole, and the father of gods and men will be no more. The knowledge he gained at such cost, the wisdom he accumulated through pain and sacrifice, will be extinguished in an instant. But Odin's death will be avenged immediately. Vidar, called the Silent God, one of Odin's sons who has spoken little throughout the myths but who is immensely strong, will step forward. He wears a shoe made from all the leather scraps that cobblers have cut away throughout history, making it impossibly thick and strong. Vidar will place this shoe in Fenrir's lower jaw and grasp the wolf's upper jaw with his hands, and with one tremendous effort, he will tear the wolf's jaws apart, killing the creature that killed his father. Thor will face Jormungandr, the world serpent whom he has encountered before but never defeated. The two ancient enemies will battle with terrible fury, the thunder god's hammer rising and falling, the serpent's coils lashing and constricting. Thor will finally land a killing blow, his hammer crushing the serpent's skull, and Jormungandr will die. But as the serpent expires, it will loose a final torrent of poison, and Thor, having achieved his victory, will stagger back 9 steps before falling dead himself, overcome by the venom. The protector of Midgard, beloved by mortals and gods alike, will die on the poisoned earth he fought so hard to defend. Freyr will fight valiantly against Surt, but without his magical sword, he is at a terrible disadvantage. He will fall before the fire giant's flaming blade, one more victim of the price paid for love, for he gave up his greatest weapon to win the wife he desired. His death will leave the forces of order without one of their greatest champions. Tyr will battle Garm, and though the god has only one hand since Fenrir bit off the other, he will fight with skill and courage. He will kill the Hound of Hell, but his wounds will be fatal, and he will die even as his enemy falls. Heimdall and Loki will face each other in combat that has been building for ages, two ancient beings who have opposed each other in principle and practice throughout history. They will fight to mutual destruction, each delivering a fatal blow to the other, and both will fall together. The Einherjar, those noble warriors who have trained for this day in Valhalla's fields, will fight alongside the gods with tremendous courage. But they will be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, the giants, the dead from Hell's realm, the monstrous spawn of chaos, all pressing forward in a tide of destruction. The warriors will die their second deaths, and this time there will be no rising, no healing, no return to the feast hall. Their sacrifice will buy moments, but it cannot change the outcome. When the gods and their enemies have all but destroyed each other, when the plain of Vigrid is soaked with the blood of gods and giants, when the few survivors stand among the fallen, Surt will perform his final act. He will take his flaming sword and set fire to the world itself. Yggdrasil will catch flame, its ancient branches burning like torches. The halls of Asgard will burn, and Valhalla's golden walls will melt. Midgard will be consumed by fire, every building and forest, every field and farm going up in flames. The earth will sink into the sea. The mountains will collapse, the sky will fall, and the stars will be extinguished. The 9 worlds will be destroyed, returning to something like the primordial chaos from which they emerged. All the order the gods created, all the beauty and meaning they brought into existence, will be unmade. The waters will rise over everything, and darkness will cover the deep. But this is not quite the end. The Voluspa, that ancient prophecy, sees beyond the destruction to what will come after. The Volva speaks of a time when the waters will recede and the earth will emerge again from the sea, green and fertile, with plants growing that have never been sown. The earth will renew itself, creating itself anew without the need for gods to shape it. In this new world, Vidar and Vale will survive, Odin's sons who were not killed in the final battle. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, will inherit Mjolnir, their father's hammer, and they will use it to defend the new world. Honor, a god we have not spoken much about, will survive to read the runes and prophesy the future. The sons of Thor's brothers will live, and they will find in the grass the golden playing pieces the Aesir once used in their games, remnants of the old world that survived the destruction. Most remarkably, Balder will return from Hel's realm, emerging into the light of the new world along with his brother Hod, who killed him. The two will be reconciled, the tragedy of Balder's death somehow healed in this fresh beginning. They will sit together and speak of old mysteries and ancient times, remembering the gods who fell and the world that was lost. A new sun will appear in the sky, the daughter of the old sun, who was hidden away before Skoll devoured her mother. This new sun will be even brighter and more beautiful than the first, and she will ride across the heavens on her appointed path, bringing light and warmth to the reborn earth. 2 humans will also survive, hidden in a place called Hotmimir's Wood, safe from the flames and floods of Ragnarok. Their names are Lif and Lifrazor, which mean life and eager for life, and they will emerge into the new world to become the ancestors of a new human race. They will be nourished by the morning dew, and they will repopulate Midgard, creating new communities, new stories, new meanings. In this renewed cosmos, there will be a hall more beautiful than any that stood before, thatched with gold and standing in the place called Gimli. Here the righteous will dwell, enjoying peace and prosperity throughout all the ages to come. Some versions of the prophecy mention a mighty ruler who will come to govern all, though his identity is left mysterious, perhaps a new chief god, perhaps something else entirely. There is even mention in some versions of a great dragon, Nidhogg, rising from the depths and flying over the reborn earth, carrying corpses on his wings, before sinking back into the darkness. This suggests that even in the new world, death and danger will not be entirely absent, that the cycle of creation and destruction may one day repeat itself, that chaos can never be permanently banished. The prophecy of Ragnarok is perhaps the most distinctive feature of Norse mythology, setting it apart from other mythological systems. Most ancient cultures envisioned their gods as eternal, unchanging, victorious over chaos for all time. But the Norse looked at their gods with clearer eyes, recognizing that all things must end, that even the mightiest powers are subject to time and fate, that the struggle against chaos is ongoing and its outcome is not guaranteed. Yet there is something strangely hopeful in this apocalyptic vision. The world ends, yes, but it is reborn. The gods fall, but their children survive. Balder returns, vindicated at last. Humans persist, carrying forward the spark of life and consciousness. The cycle continues, and though much is lost, something essential remains and grows again. This understanding of endings and beginnings, of death and rebirth, reflects the experience of the Norse people themselves, living in a harsh climate where winter was a kind of small apocalypse each year, killing the green world and threatening human survival, yet spring always returned, life always renewed itself. The agricultural cycle, the turning of seasons, the eternal alternation of light and darkness, all of these taught that endings are also beginnings, that what seems like final destruction may be transformation instead. The Norse myths come to us from a world that no longer exists, preserved in texts written down by Christian monks who tried to record the old stories even as they were fading from living memory. The Elder Edda, a collection of poems about gods and heroes, and the Prose Edda, a handbook of mythology written by the Icelandic scholar Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, are primary sources for these tales. These texts were composed in Iceland, that island of fire and ice at the edge of the known world, where the old beliefs persisted longer than elsewhere in Scandinavia. Iceland itself was settled relatively late, in the 9th and 10th centuries, by Norse people fleeing the consolidation of royal power in Norway and seeking freedom and land of their own. They brought with them the old stories, the beliefs in the Asir and Vanir, the customs and practices that connected them to their ancestors. But they also encountered Christianity, which was spreading through the Norse world, and eventually Iceland officially converted to Christianity around the year 1000, though many old practices continued in modified form. The myths were preserved in part because they were seen as cultural heritage, stories about the ancestors and their beliefs, even by people who no longer worshipped the old gods. The poems of the Elder Edda were memorized and transmitted orally for generations before being written down, and their alliterative verse and kennings, those poetic circumlocutions like Whale Road for sea and Battle Sweat for blood, preserve something of the flavor of the original oral performance. The myths tell us much about the people who believed them. We see a culture that valued courage above almost all else, that believed fame and reputation could outlast death, that understood life as harsh and dangerous but worth living with intensity and passion. We see a people who looked at their gods not as remote, perfect beings but as powerful relatives who could help or harm, who had their own agendas and limitations, who could be bargained with or manipulated or even threatened if necessary. The relationship between humans and gods in Norse mythology is more transactional than in many other religious systems. Sacrifices were offered to the gods not out of pure devotion but in expectation of concrete benefits, victory in battle, good harvests, safe voyages, successful births. If a god failed to deliver what was asked, offerings might be withheld or directed to a different deity. This practical, almost business-like approach to the divine reflects a culture of traders and raiders, farmers and craftsmen, who understood that survival required paying attention to what worked and abandoning what didn't. The Norse value system, which scholars have termed honor culture, placed enormous emphasis on reputation and public standing. What others thought of you mattered more than almost anything else, because fame was the only form of immortality available to mortals. A person who died having achieved great deeds and won honor would live on in the stories told about them, in the praise poetry composed in their memory, in the example they set for future generations. But a person who died without accomplishing anything worthy of memory would be forgotten as if they had never existed, which was the worst fate imaginable. This concern with reputation shaped behavior in profound ways. Insults and slights had to be avenged, or one would be seen as weak and cowardly. Oaths and promises were sacred because breaking one's word was shameful beyond measure. Generosity was expected of those with wealth because a reputation for stinginess was deeply damaging. Physical courage was essential because cowardice was the ultimate disgrace. Even revenge for murdered kinsmen was not optional but required. A person who failed to avenge their relatives' deaths would lose all respect and honor. Yet the Norse also recognized and valued other qualities. Wisdom and cleverness were admired, as shown by the respect given to Odin's pursuit of knowledge and the praise heaped on clever solutions to problems. Hospitality was a sacred duty, with elaborate customs governing how guests should be received and treated. Loyalty to family and chosen companions was paramount. Self-control and the ability to endure hardship without complaint were signs of strength. Poetry and eloquence were highly valued, with skilled poets earning places of honor in kings' halls. The Norse understanding of fate and free will was complex and seemingly contradictory. On one hand, they believed that the Norns had woven each person's fate and that what was destined would inevitably come to pass. The gods themselves knew their doom at Ragnarok but could not prevent it. Yet at the same time, individuals were praised or blamed for their choices, as if they had genuine agency and could have acted differently. This tension was never really resolved, perhaps because it reflects the actual human experience of feeling both free and constrained, of making choices while also sensing that some things are inevitable. The sagas, those prose narratives about the lives of historical or semi-historical figures, show this tension clearly. Characters often learn through prophecy or dreams that some terrible fate awaits them, and despite their best efforts to avoid it, the prophecy comes true, often because of the very actions they take to prevent it. Yet they are still judged by how they respond to their fate, facing it with courage or trying to flee, accepting it with dignity or raging against it. The outcome may be fixed, but the manner of reaching it is what reveals character and determines reputation. The legal system the Norse developed, with its things or assemblies where disputes were settled through argument and testimony and judgment, shows a culture that valued order and justice even as it accepted violence as sometimes necessary. The law codes were complex and detailed, providing compensation schedules for every kind of injury or insult, creating mechanisms for feuds to be ended through payment of war guild, price, rather than continuing cycles of revenge. Yet the system also recognized that some offenses could not be compensated with money and that outlawry, banishment from society and its protections, was appropriate for the most serious crimes. An outlaw lost all legal rights. They could be killed without consequence, their property could be seized, and no one could legally give them shelter or assistance. This was a terrible fate in a harsh land where survival often depended on community support. Yet outlawry also created a category of people living beyond society's rules, and some outlaws became legendary figures, carrying out raids and adventures free from normal constraints. The Norse practice of raiding, which brought them into violent contact with much of Europe from the late 8th century onward, was partly economic, seeking wealth and goods not available at home, but also tied to the honor culture and the desire to win fame. A young man who wanted to prove himself would join a raiding expedition, seeking opportunities to demonstrate courage and win treasure that would allow him to establish himself back home. Successful raiders were celebrated in poetry and song, their deeds adding to their reputation and making them attractive marriage partners and respected community members. From the perspective of those being raided, of course, the Norse Vikings were terrifying pirates and killers, attacking monasteries and towns without warning, carrying off slaves and treasure, burning and destroying whatever they couldn't take. The image of dragon-prowed ships appearing suddenly on the horizon became a symbol of terror throughout Europe. The prayer, from the fury of the Northmen, "O Lord, deliver us," supposedly appeared in liturgies, though historians now doubt the authenticity of this specific prayer. Yet the Norse were not merely raiders. They were also traders, explorers, settlers, and craftsmen. They established trade routes that stretched from Scandinavia to Byzantium, from the British Isles to the Middle East. They founded Dublin and Kiev, explored Iceland and Greenland, reached North America centuries before Columbus. They integrated into the societies they settled, sometimes through conquest but often through marriage and cultural exchange. The Normans, who conquered England in 1066, were descended from Norse raiders who had settled in northern France and adopted French language and culture while retaining something of their northern heritage. The conversion of the Norse world to Christianity happened gradually over several centuries, and it was often a political decision as much as a religious one. Kings who converted gained access to the wider European Christian world, to trade networks and diplomatic alliances, to the literate culture of the Church. But many common people continued to practice the old ways, offering sacrifices to Thor and Freyr, consulting Volvas about the future, and appealing to land spirits for protection. Even after official conversion, elements of the old beliefs persisted. Some gods were reinterpreted as historical kings who had been deified after death. Some practices were absorbed into Christian folk customs. Some stories continued to be told as entertainment even if they were no longer believed as literal truth. This syncretic period, when old and new existed side by side, produced some of the most interesting cultural developments, including the preservation of the myths in written form. The gradual fading of the old gods from active worship to cultural memory to scholarly interest mirrors the prophecy of Ragnarok itself, an ending that is also a transformation, a death that makes way for new life. The gods fell, in a sense, when people stopped believing in them, when churches replaced temples and Christ replaced Odin as the figure to whom prayers were directed. Yet they survived in the stories, in the place names, in the days of the week, Tuesday named for Tyr, Wednesday for Odin, Woden, Thursday for Thor, Friday for Frigg or Freya, in the continued power of the myths to speak to something deep in human experience. Modern interest in Norse mythology has gone through several phases. The myths were rediscovered by Romantic thinkers in the 18th and 19th centuries who saw in them something authentically Germanic or Nordic, untainted by Mediterranean influences. This sometimes led to nationalist appropriation of the myths, most notoriously by the Nazis who twisted Thor and Odin into symbols of their racist ideology. This dark chapter has made it difficult to engage with the myths without being aware of how they can be misused. Yet the myths themselves resist such appropriation if read carefully and completely. The gods are complex and flawed, the giants are not simple enemies but necessary parts of the cosmic order, the boundaries between categories are constantly crossed and transgressed. Odin learns magic from giants and giantesses, Thor's mother is a giantess, the gods regularly marry into giant families. The simple binary of us versus them that nationalist ideologies require doesn't actually exist in the myths, which are far more interested in ambiguity, contradiction, and the mixing of categories than in purity and separation. In recent decades, Norse mythology has experienced a new surge of popular interest, appearing in comic books and movies, novels and video games, television shows and music. Thor appears as a superhero, Odin as a wise king, Loki as a charming villain. While these adaptations take enormous liberties with the original myths, they also introduce new generations to the stories and sometimes inspire people to seek out the original sources. The academic study of Norse mythology has become increasingly sophisticated, drawing on archaeology, linguistics, comparative religion, and anthropology to understand the myths in their original context. Scholars debate the age of various poems, the extent of Christian influence on the written sources, the relationship between Norse myths and the broader Indo-European mythological tradition, the meanings of obscure kennings and references, and the social functions the myths served in pre-Christian Scandinavia. What continues to fascinate about these myths, what keeps drawing people back to them across the centuries, is perhaps their fundamental honesty about the human condition. The Norse myths don't promise that good will triumph over evil, that justice will always prevail, that faith will be rewarded or virtue protected. Instead, they acknowledge that life is hard, that even the mighty fall, that efforts to impose order on chaos are always temporary and partial, that death comes to everyone regardless of their deeds or their worth. Yet in the face of this unflinching realism, the myths also celebrate courage, loyalty, generosity, and the refusal to surrender even when defeat is certain. The gods go to Ragnarok knowing they will fall, but they go anyway, fighting to the end. Heroes face impossible odds and certain doom, but they face them with weapons in hand and songs on their lips. This combination of clear-eyed acknowledgement of mortality with fierce determination to live and die well speaks to something universal in human experience. The Norse myths remind us that meaning is not given from outside but created through our choices and actions, that fame and honor are earned through how we treat others and how we face challenges, that the brief time we have is precious precisely because it is limited. They teach that it is better to die with honor than live with shame, better to be remembered for great deeds than forgotten in comfortable safety, better to fight knowing you will lose than to surrender without resistance. At the same time, the myths are not all grim stoicism and violent heroism. There is humor in them, Loki's pranks, Thor's gluttony and quick temper, the clever ways heroes trick giants and monsters. There is love and longing, Freyr's yearning for Gerd, Freya's tears of red gold, Sigurd and Brynhild's tragic passion. There is wonder and beauty, the golden apples that keep the gods young, the rainbow bridge connecting worlds, Yggdrasil's branches reaching into heaven and its roots delving into the depths, the halls of Asgard gleaming in eternal sunlight. The myths create a cosmos that is both magnificent and fragile, both ordered and chaotic, both meaningful and arbitrary. Everything is connected, the gods to the giants, the living to the dead, the past to the future, the small choices of individuals to the fate of entire worlds. Yet these connections don't form a neat, logical system but rather a tangled web where cause and effect are not always clear, where contradictions coexist without resolution, where mystery remains at the heart of everything. Perhaps this is why the myths continue to resonate in our own time, when many of the certainties that once seemed solid have dissolved, when ancient authorities have been questioned, when traditional structures and meanings have been challenged. The Norse myths come from a world that knew uncertainty and impermanence, that faced vast forces beyond human control, that created meaning in the face of meaninglessness. These are experiences and challenges we recognize. The gods walking the earth in disguise, testing the hospitality of mortals, might be seen as a recognition that the divine is not distant but near, that every encounter with a stranger is potentially sacred, that we should treat others well not only from self-interest but because we never know who we are really dealing with. The emphasis on hospitality and gift-giving, on the obligations created by sharing food and shelter, speaks to the importance of building networks of mutual support in a harsh world where no one survives alone. The practice of blood brotherhood, where unrelated men became brothers through ritual and oath, choosing kinship rather than merely accepting what birth provided, shows a culture that understood identity as flexible and created rather than fixed and given. The fluid boundaries between gods and giants, between divine and monstrous, between order and chaos, suggest a worldview more comfortable with ambiguity and paradox than with simple categories and clear distinctions. The role of women in the myths, as warriors like the Valkyries, as magic users like Freya and the Volvas, as clever counselors like Frigg, as agents of fate like the Norns, reflects a society where women had more legal rights and social power than in many comparable cultures. Yet it was still a patriarchal society where men held most formal authority, and the myths reflect this tension, showing women as powerful but often working through indirect means, influencing from within domestic spaces or through magical means rather than through direct political or military authority. The Norse concept of hamingja, a kind of luck or fortune that belonged to individuals and families, that could be strengthened or weakened by one's actions, that could even be transferred or inherited, suggests a belief in personal power that was not entirely determined by external forces. Your hamingja could be built up through brave deeds and honorable conduct, or it could be depleted through cowardice and shameful behavior. This gave individuals a sense of agency even within a worldview that emphasized fate and destiny. The practice of making sacrifices to the gods, animals, valuable objects, sometimes even humans in extreme circumstances, was based on the principle of dutida, I give so that you will give. The relationship with the divine was transactional, a kind of exchange where humans provided worship and offerings in return for divine favor and assistance. This practical approach to religion stands in interesting contrast to faiths that emphasize love, devotion, or submission to divine will regardless of tangible benefits. The Norse funeral practices, which we touched on earlier, reveal beliefs about death and the afterlife that were complex and multi-layered. A person might be buried in a ship to symbolize the journey to the other world, but the same person might also be thought to dwell in their burial mound, requiring food offerings from descendants. They might be in Valhalla or Hell or Rand's Hall beneath the sea. These seemingly contradictory beliefs coexisted because the Norse understanding of the soul was not of a single, indivisible entity but rather multiple aspects of the person that might have different destinations after death. The concept of the fetch or fylgja, a kind of guardian spirit that appeared in animal form and was connected to a person's fate, shows a belief in spiritual doubles or aspects of the self that could separate from the body. The hammer was another aspect of the self, the shape or form that could be changed through magic or will. Berserkers, warriors who fought in a frenzy, wearing bear or wolf skins and seemingly possessed by animal strength and savagery, were said to have sent forth their hammer in animal form while their bodies remained in trance. These beliefs in shape-shifting and multiple aspects of the self suggest a worldview where identity was less fixed and solid than in modern Western thought, where boundaries between human and animal, physical and spiritual, self and other were more permeable and negotiable. This fluid understanding of identity appears throughout the myths, in Loki's constant shape-shifting, in Odin's many disguises, in the way gods could appear as humans and humans could take on divine or monstrous characteristics. The runes, which Odin gained through his self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil, were understood as more than a writing system. Each rune was a symbol containing power and meaning, a magical tool that could be carved or spoken to achieve effects in the world. Rune magic involved knowing the right runes for different purposes, to bring victory, to heal wounds, to calm storms, to win love, to curse enemies, to see hidden things. The runes connected the practitioner to deep sources of power, to the fundamental patterns underlying reality itself. Poetry, too, was understood as having magical power. A skilled poet could preserve a person's fame for generations, could shape how they were remembered and what their life meant. The mead of poetry, which Odin stole from the giants, granted the ability to compose verse that would move hearts and change minds. Poets were valued members of kings' retinues, and their praise or blame could enhance or damage reputations in lasting ways. The Norse myths, then, come from a culture that valued eloquence and artistic expression, that saw language as powerful and poets as wielders of a kind of magic. The myths themselves are often structured as poems, with complex alliterative patterns and elaborate kennings that require cultural knowledge to decode. They were meant to be performed, spoken, or sung aloud to audiences who would appreciate their artistry as well as their content. As we approach the end of our long journey through Norse mythology, it seems fitting to reflect on what these ancient stories offer to us in our own time, so far removed from the world that created them. We live in an age of science and technology, where the mechanisms of nature are better understood than ever before, where magic has been replaced by engineering, where the gods have been explained away as primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena or as projections of human psychology. Yet something in these old stories still speaks to us, still resonates in ways that purely rational explanations of the world cannot quite capture. Perhaps it is the recognition that meaning and purpose are not given but created, that we must forge our own sense of significance in a cosmos that offers no inherent guarantee of justice or happy endings. The Norse faced this reality squarely. Their gods were doomed, their world would end, yet they chose to feast and fight and sing anyway, to create beauty and meaning in the face of inevitable destruction. Or perhaps what draws us is the complexity and ambiguity of the myths, the way they refuse to offer simple answers or comfortable reassurances. The gods are not all good or all-knowing, the giants are not simply evil, the heroes make terrible mistakes, and the outcomes of actions are often unexpected and tragic. This moral complexity, this refusal to divide the world into simple categories of good and evil, feels more true to actual human experience than many more optimistic or moralistic mythologies. The emphasis on courage in the face of doom, on maintaining honor even when no one is watching, on loyalty to chosen companions even unto death, these values may seem archaic, yet they speak to enduring questions about what makes life worth living, about what we owe to others and to ourselves, about how to face mortality with dignity. The Norse answer, that fame and reputation outlast the individual, that how we live matters more than how long we live, that courage and honor are their own rewards regardless of outcome, offers one response to the eternal human confrontation with death and meaninglessness. The Norse myths also remind us of the importance of connection and relationship. The gods do not stand alone but exist in complex webs of kinship, alliance, and obligation. They have friends and enemies, lovers and rivals, children and parents. They make oaths and break them, form alliances and betray them, help each other and scheme against each other. Even Odin, the All-Father and King of gods, depends on his ravens for information, on his wife's wisdom, on his warrior's strength. No one, not even the mightiest god, is entirely self-sufficient or independent. This recognition of interdependence appears throughout the myths in the importance placed on hospitality, gift-giving, and the obligations created by sharing food and shelter. The wanderer depends on the hospitality of strangers, but the host also gains honor and potentially valuable alliances by treating guests well. The gift must be repaid with a gift, creating ongoing relationships of mutual obligation. The blood brother pledges to avenge his sworn kinsman as he would his birth brother, creating chosen family that binds as strongly as blood. In our own age, when individualism is often celebrated and self-sufficiency praised as an ideal, the Norse emphasis on interconnection and mutual obligation offers a corrective perspective. We are reminded that we exist in networks of relationship, that we depend on others and they on us, that isolation is not freedom but a form of death. The worst punishment the Norse could imagine, after all, was outlawry, being cut off from society, from the protection and support of community, from the relationships that gave life meaning and safety. The Norse relationship with nature, too, speaks to contemporary concerns. They lived close to the land, dependent on its bounty and vulnerable to its fury. They saw the natural world as alive with spirits, with consciousness and will. Every feature of the landscape had its guardian, every unusual formation its story. The land was not mere resource to be exploited but rather a living community of which humans were one part, and maintaining right relationship with the land spirits was essential for prosperity and survival. This animistic worldview, where everything has spirit and consciousness, where the boundary between living and non-living is blurred or non-existent, might seem primitive to modern sensibilities. Yet as we confront environmental crisis and the consequences of treating nature as dead matter to be used without limit or consequence, perhaps there is wisdom in the older understanding that sees the earth as alive, that recognizes our kinship with other forms of life, that understands that what we do to the world we do ultimately to ourselves. The cyclical understanding of time in Norse mythology, where the world is destroyed and reborn, where endings are also beginnings, where death and life are part of a single ongoing process, contrasts with the linear view of history that dominates modern Western thought. We tend to see time as moving in one direction, from past through present to future, with history as a story of progress or decline. The Norse saw time as more cyclical, with patterns repeating, with the new world after Ragnarok in some ways resembling the old world before it. This cyclical view reflects the agricultural year and the wheel of seasons, but it also offers a different way of understanding change and continuity. Endings are not final, they lead to new beginnings. Destruction clears the way for creation. What seems like loss may be transformation. The specific forms pass away, but something essential remains and takes new shape. There is a kind of comfort in this view, a recognition that life persists despite catastrophe, that the cycle continues even when individual lives and even entire worlds end. The Norse myths also grapple with questions of knowledge and ignorance, wisdom and folly. Odin's quest for wisdom drives much of his story. He sacrifices his eye, hangs himself from Yggdrasil, travels in disguise to gather knowledge from giants and mortals alike. Yet despite all his accumulated wisdom, despite knowing what fate awaits him and the other gods, he cannot prevent Ragnarok. Knowledge does not equal power, and even divine wisdom has limits. This recognition that knowledge is valuable but not sufficient, that wisdom cannot solve all problems or prevent all disasters, feels relevant in an age where we have access to more information than any previous generation yet still struggle with how to act wisely, how to address collective challenges, how to avoid catastrophe. Like Odin, we can see disaster approaching but seem unable to change course. Like the gods, we know our civilization faces existential threats yet continue in patterns that lead toward destruction. Yet the myths also show that not knowing is sometimes better than knowing. Baldur's dreams of his own death, the prophecy that reveals Ragnarok's inevitability, the Volva's visions of doom, this foreknowledge brings suffering without providing the power to change fate. Sometimes ignorance is a mercy, allowing us to live fully in the present rather than being paralyzed by knowledge of future suffering. The myths thus hold in tension two opposing truths: that knowledge is valuable and worth pursuing, but that too much knowledge can be a burden, and that mystery and uncertainty are part of the human condition. The trickster figure of Loki deserves special consideration as we reflect on the myth's contemporary relevance. Loki is perhaps the most fascinating and troubling character in Norse mythology, neither fully god nor fully giant, neither reliable ally nor simple enemy. He creates problems and solves them, helps the gods and betrays them, brings laughter and brings tragedy. He crosses every boundary, violates every category, refuses to stay in his assigned place. Loki can be read as representing the principle of disruption and change, the necessary chaos that prevents stagnation but also threatens destruction. He is creativity and innovation, but also destructive impulse and nihilistic rage. He speaks uncomfortable truths but also lies with extraordinary skill. He challenges authority and questions assumptions, but his challenges often lead to disaster. We need figures like Loki to shake up established orders and reveal their hypocrisies, yet we also need protection from the destruction such figures can cause. In contemporary discussions of Norse mythology, Loki has become something of a symbol for various forms of nonconformity and rebellion. His gender fluidity, transforming into a mare to bear Sleipnir, taking female form for various purposes, has made him an icon for some LGBTQ+ people who see in him a deity who transgresses gender boundaries. His position as an outsider who is both within and excluded from the community of gods resonates with those who feel marginal to dominant society. Yet Loki is also dangerous, destructive, ultimately untrustworthy. He plots the death of innocent Balder, brings about Ragnarok, sides with the forces of chaos against the order he helped create. Any valorization of Loki must contend with these darker aspects of his character, must acknowledge that not all boundary crossing is liberating, that some rules exist for good reasons, that absolute freedom from constraint is not the same as meaningful freedom. The punishment of Loki, bound in a cave with poison dripping on him, his faithful wife Sigyn standing by him even in his agony, raises questions about justice and mercy, about the limits of tolerance and the consequences of betrayal. The gods have used Loki's cleverness many times, have benefited from his schemes and gifts, yet when he goes too far, they punish him with exemplary cruelty. Is this justice or revenge? Could the tragedy have been prevented by treating Loki with more respect and inclusion? Or was his nature such that betrayal was inevitable regardless of how he was treated? These questions have no easy answers, which is precisely why they continue to provoke thought and discussion. The myths present situations and characters in their complexity without offering simple moral lessons or clear prescriptions for behavior. They invite us to think, to question, to grapple with difficulties rather than providing comfortable certainties. The figure of Odin deserves similar reflection. He is the All-Father, the King of gods, the patron of warriors and poets, the seeker of wisdom. Yet he is also called the Terrible One, the gallows god, the betrayer. He grants victory in battle but withdraws his favor capriciously, sending warriors to their deaths when he needs them in Valhalla. He seeks wisdom obsessively but uses it for his own purposes. He makes oaths and breaks them. He sacrifices others and himself in pursuit of knowledge and power. Odin embodies a kind of ruthless pragmatism, doing whatever is necessary to achieve his goals, bound by no rules except those he chooses to accept, answerable to no authority higher than himself. He is a god of wisdom but also of war, of poetry but also of death, of civilization but also of wild inspiration and ecstatic frenzy. This combination of seemingly contradictory attributes makes him a complex and troubling figure, not easily categorized or morally evaluated. In some ways, Odin represents the exercise of power itself, its necessity, its dangers, its moral ambiguity. Those with power make decisions that affect countless others, decisions that often involve choosing the lesser evil rather than pure good, that sacrifice some for the benefit of others, that require getting hands dirty in ways that are hard to justify but seem unavoidable. Odin sees the big picture, plans for the long term, makes hard choices. But his perspective is not necessarily wiser or more moral than those of the people affected by his decisions. Thor, by contrast, represents a simpler and more straightforward heroism. He is strong and brave, honest and loyal, straightforward in his dealings with others. He fights giants not for complex strategic reasons but because they threaten the world he protects. He is beloved by common people because he is understandable and predictable, because his values align with theirs, because he defends their farms and communities from forces of chaos. Where Odin is complex and ambiguous, Thor is clear and direct. Yet even Thor has his flaws. He is quick to anger, sometimes too ready to resort to violence, capable of bullying and intimidation. His straightforwardness can be a limitation as well as a virtue when dealing with complex situations that require subtlety. His strength, while formidable, is not always the solution to every problem. The myths thus show us different models of heroism, different approaches to challenges, without clearly declaring one superior to all others. The goddesses of Norse mythology also offer varied models of feminine power and agency. Freya is associated with love and beauty but also with war and magic, with sexuality and with Cedar, with choosing half the slain warriors for her own hall. She weeps tears of gold for her absent husband but also travels freely, making her own choices, wielding power that even male gods respect. She is not domesticated or tamed but rather wild and free, powerful in ways both traditionally feminine and traditionally masculine. Frigg represents a different kind of power, the power of the one who knows but does not always speak, who works behind the scenes, who manages relationships and holds communities together. She knows the fate of all beings but keeps her knowledge to herself, choosing when and how to intervene. Her failed attempt to save Balder shows both the extent of her power. She can extract oaths from everything in existence, and its limits. She cannot change what the Norns have woven or outsmart Loki's malice. Skadi, the giantess who came to Asgard seeking compensation for her father's death, shows a woman negotiating with gods on equal terms, demanding what she is owed, making choices about her own life. Her marriage to Njord ultimately fails because they cannot agree on where to live. She wants the mountains, he wants the sea, and neither will compromise. This suggests a recognition that not all relationships can or should be preserved, that sometimes incompatibility is real and separation is the right choice. The Valkyries represent women as warriors, choosing who lives and dies in battle, serving Odin but exercising their own judgment. They are beautiful but deadly, both nurturing, bringing the chosen dead to Valhalla's feast, and destructive, ensuring those same warriors die in the first place. They embody a combination of feminine and masculine traits that defies simple categorization. As we draw near the end of our journey through these ancient stories, we might ask what it means to engage with Norse mythology in the 21st century. These are not our gods, or at least, not the gods of most people listening to these words. These stories come from a culture that is not ours, from a time long past, from people whose values and assumptions differed in important ways from contemporary ones. Yet the myths are part of our cultural heritage, part of the tapestry of stories that shape how we think about gods and heroes, fate and freedom, life and death. They have influenced literature and art, from Wagner's operas to Tolkien's fantasy novels, from comic books to video games. Elements of Norse mythology have become part of popular culture, recognized by people who have never read the original sources. This popularization creates both opportunities and dangers. It introduces people to the myths but often in simplified or distorted forms. It keeps the stories alive but sometimes strips away their complexity and strangeness. It makes the myths accessible but can also lead to misappropriation, to using these ancient stories to support modern ideologies that would have been foreign to the original tellers. Reading the myths carefully and thoughtfully, in translation of the original texts when possible, helps us appreciate their actual content rather than modern interpretations or adaptations. The Poetic Edda and Prose Edda are available in good English translations, along with scholarly commentaries that explain references and context. Reading these sources reveals myths that are often more strange, more ambiguous, more morally complex than popular versions suggest. We should also remember that these myths were never a single, unified system but rather a collection of stories that varied by region and changed over time. The versions preserved in the written texts are snapshots of a living tradition at particular moments, not authoritative scriptures but rather records of what people told and believed in Iceland in the 12th and 13th centuries. Earlier versions might have been different, and versions told elsewhere in Scandinavia certainly varied from what was preserved in Iceland. This means there is no single, correct version of Norse mythology, no orthodox interpretation that all must accept. The myths are inherently multiple and flexible, open to different readings and applications. This multiplicity is not a weakness but a strength, allowing each generation to find new meanings and relevances in the old stories, to see different aspects depending on what questions they bring to the texts. In our own time, as we face challenges both personal and collective, the meaning of life in a secular age, the threat of environmental catastrophe, questions of identity and community, the search for purpose and significance, the Norse myths offer one set of resources for thinking through these issues. They don't provide answers so much as frame questions, offer perspectives, present thought experiments about how to live well and die bravely, how to create meaning in the face of meaninglessness, how to maintain hope when doom seems certain. The image of the gods riding to Ragnarok, knowing they will fall but going anyway, fighting to the end not because victory is possible but because fighting is what they do, what gives their existence meaning and purpose. This image speaks to something deep in human experience. We all face our own Ragnarok, our own inevitable ending, our own battles we cannot win. The question is not whether we will fall but how we will face our falling, not whether we can prevent death but whether we can die well. The vision of the world reborn after Ragnarok, green and beautiful, with survivors who remember the old times and build something new, this offers hope without denying tragedy, promise without pretending that loss is not real. Things end, people die, worlds fall, but life continues, creation renews itself, something essential persists even through catastrophe. This is not simple optimism but rather a complex recognition that endings and beginnings are intertwined, that destruction and creation are part of a single ongoing process. The Norse myths teach us to value courage, loyalty, generosity, and honor, not because these virtues guarantee success or happiness but because they define us, shape our character, determine how we will be remembered. They teach us to face hard truths without flinching, to acknowledge limits without surrendering to despair, to create meaning through our choices even when we cannot control outcomes. They teach us that wisdom is valuable but not sufficient, that knowledge has limits, that some mysteries remain forever beyond our understanding. They teach us that power is necessary but dangerous, that those who wield it must use it with care, that the line between protective strength and destructive tyranny is thin and easily crossed. They teach us that relationships matter more than individual achievement, that we are defined by our connections to others, that isolation is a kind of death. They teach us that hospitality and generosity create community, that gift-giving builds relationships, that the obligations we accept bind us together in networks of mutual support. They teach us to respect the natural world, to see it as alive and conscious, to recognize our kinship with other forms of life, to understand that we are part of nature rather than separate from or superior to it. They teach us that the land has memory, that places have character, that we inherit the consequences of how previous generations treated the earth. Most fundamentally, perhaps, the Norse myths teach us that meaning is not discovered but created, not given from outside but forged through our choices and actions. The gods did not create the world according to some pre-existing plan but rather shaped it from the body of the murdered giant Ymir, working with the materials at hand to create something ordered and beautiful from primordial chaos. Similarly, we must create meaning from the circumstances of our lives, must forge purpose from the raw material of existence, must choose what we will value and defend even knowing that all things are temporary. The gods of Asgard feast and fight, love and quarrel, triumph and fail, and then they ride to their doom, knowing what awaits them but going anyway because that is what gods do, what heroes do, what anyone who refuses to surrender in the face of inevitable defeat must do. They die, but their story continues, preserved in the memory of the survivors, carried forward into the new world that emerges from the ashes of the old. And perhaps that is the deepest teaching of these ancient myths, that while individuals and even worlds must end, stories persist, memories endure, and the meaning we create through our lives ripples outward beyond our brief time, influencing those who come after in ways we cannot predict or control. We are all part of a great story that began long before us and will continue long after, and our task is to play our part as well as we can, with courage and honor, with loyalty and generosity, creating meaning and beauty even in the face of mortality and loss. The old gods may have fallen, but their stories remain, speaking across the centuries to anyone willing to listen, offering wisdom born of harsh experience, beauty forged in the frozen north, meaning created in the face of inevitable doom. These are not comfortable stories or easy lessons, but they are true to something essential in human experience, and they have the power still to move us, to challenge us, to remind us of what matters and what endures. And so our journey through Norse mythology comes to an end, though the stories themselves have no ending, living on in each retelling, each new interpretation, each reader or listener who encounters them and finds in them something meaningful. The gods sleep perhaps, in whatever realm receives fallen deities, but they wake whenever someone speaks their names, tells their stories, grapples with the questions and challenges that have troubled human hearts since the beginning of time. Let the old tales rest now in your mind, settling into whatever place stories occupy in the quiet moments before sleep, mixing with your own memories and dreams, becoming part of the vast tapestry of meaning that each of us weaves from the threads of experience, imagination, and inherited wisdom. Let the gods and giants, heroes and monsters, become companions for your own journey through this brief and beautiful life. The world tree Yggdrasil stands eternal, its roots reaching into darkness, its branches stretching toward light, its trunk connecting all the worlds in one great pattern of meaning and connection. We are leaves on that tree, brief and green, destined to fall when our season ends, yet part of something larger and more enduring than ourselves. The tree remains, and new leaves will grow, and the great pattern continues, cycle after cycle, story after story, from the beginning that has no beginning to the ending that is always also a beginning. Sleep well, kind listener, and may your dreams be filled with the wild beauty of the north, with halls of gold and ships with dragon prows, with mighty hammers and magical rings, with heroes facing impossible odds and gods walking among mortals, with all the wonder and terror and tragedy and triumph of these ancient stories that have traveled so far through time to reach your ears on this quiet night. May you face your own challenges with the courage of Thor, seek wisdom with the determination of Odin, remain loyal with the steadfastness of Sigyn, and find in the cycle of seasons and the turning of years the same hope that emerged from Ragnarok's ashes, that life renews itself, that meaning persists, that the story continues, and that we are all part of something greater and more enduring than our individual selves. The mists are rising now, and the old gods are fading back into the realm of story and memory from which we summoned them. The journey is complete, the tales are told, and the night grows deep and quiet around us. Rest now, and let the myths work their subtle magic in your dreaming mind, connecting you to the great chain of memory that stretches back through countless generations of tellers and listeners, back to the beginning when the first voice spoke the first story into the darkness, creating meaning where there was none, building with words a bridge between solitude and community, between mortality and something that endures. Good night, traveler through time and story. May you rest well, dream deep, and wake refreshed to face whatever adventures tomorrow brings, carrying with you whatever wisdom these ancient myths have offered, whatever beauty you have found in their telling, whatever comfort comes from knowing that you are not alone in your struggles, that others before you have faced fear and loss and death with courage and creativity, leaving behind stories that speak still to the human heart across all the centuries that separate us from them. The fire is burning low, the night is deep and still, and the old stories have been told once more. Sleep now, and let them watch over your dreams like guardian spirits, like land wights protecting the sleeper, like the Norns weaving their threads, like the gods in their distant halls raising cups to toast those who remember them still. The end is also a beginning, and the story never truly ends but only waits to be told again, to find new listeners, to work its ancient magic one more time. Rest well, and know that you are part of this great continuity, this unbroken chain of story and memory that connects us all, mortal and divine, ancient and modern, sleeping and waking, in the eternal dream of meaning we create together. Good night.